So first of all, obviously, from this point, first of all, we understand how valuable every day is, and how valuable every year is, and how there's constantly new vitality and new meaning to be found in the world. And I think that's kind of obvious from the fact that we're here. Because if everything was done and God got everything he wanted yesterday, then what do we need today for? Right? I mean, there's got to be something new going on. Of course, it's very hidden from us. We can't, it's very hard for us to see such a thing. But nevertheless, to have a certain awareness that every day has its unique mission, and that every day has its unique power and energy, and I guess enlightenment that person can find. See, maybe just say it simply, each day has its own message. Each day has its own mission, right? And that's something that rejuvenates a person on a daily basis when they have that understanding. They feel invigorated. Well, today is something special. Today I have a different mission, a special mission than yesterday, and there's opportunities out there, spiritually, morally, as to this, based on, in other words, the circumstances I'm going to go through today provide a special opportunity that didn't exist yesterday. Whether that's also has to do with that. I'm a different person than I was yesterday. There's different energies I may be able, if I overcome special tests that go on today, and through doing so, I reach a higher heights and a greater closeness to God through those things. So each day is special. It's not just another day, it's random. So in other words, this idea that really we begin with to a great extent in the distinction between atheism and belief, particularly Jewish belief, is that, the meaninglessness turns into really, super meaning, how do I say, or divine significance of not just generally that the world has a purpose, but even every day and every moment has its purpose also. So it really should invigorate us. It's interesting because I was just watching a little bit of a video which was talking about the ailments of the younger generation. What is it? Generation Z? What is it called? Generation Z, I think. It's interesting that they call them Generation Z because Z is the last letter. And what are they saying? That Mashiach is coming? I mean, there's no other generations planned? That's it? This is the last one? Interesting. But anyway, point is they were talking about the problem of depression, despite the fact that people have so many conveniences and so many options, and it can indulge in so many pleasures. One of the things that I guess the psychologist was describing it, what was the word that they mentioned? Well, they basically said that this has made people hypersensitive, actually. It's made them frail. I mean, not frail is not the word, but something made people into very fragile. That's the word. People have become very fragile. They are so unaccustomed to any difficulties. And because of this, or maybe it's partly says one of the reasons that there's a lot of avoidance, and with all the, internet devices, there's a lot of escapism. But anyway, the point is, though, I think was what I really want to touch on also, is that I think the lack of belief plays a role also. As they go on to say in this video, people don't have a mission, people don't have any purpose. And that's really a very that's the logical conclusion of atheism, really, is that there isn't any purpose. All you can do is create your own purpose. By the end of the day, how far does that take you? It can only be as strong as your own self-worth and your own will. It can't take you above your own perception. There's nothing outside of yourself. It says you decide. Anyhow, I guess my point is simply, again, from showing you this rationally, even in secular thinking, outside of strictly Jewish thought, there's this idea that having a mission gives a person vitality. And so from one year to the next, there's some kind of a nuanced difference in our mission from year to year. It's a little bit different. Part of that is we're different. but we're going to go through different things in this year. Also, we can reach higher heights than we did, and that itself creates a whole different mission. Because first of all, we may be scrutinized more than we were last year. We have a totally different, something new is expected from us. It's kind of like our parents as we got older as children. What was okay last year is not okay. We're older now. Expect more of you. And so what last year was not a test, you were not expected to say no, or you were not expected to push that hard. This year you are. So that's part of what is the idea of a new year and new mission. People often find the laws between man and man as to be the more rational and sensible, and most of the 7 laws are between man and man. But nevertheless, one of the really beauties of the other laws having to do with man and God is well, first off, they refine and make the soul of a person healthy. But besides that, they can give meaning to every moment of your life, because you can't always be involved with somebody else. But even if you're sitting alone at home, you can still study Torah. You can still think about, meditate on God. You can still pray, or do other things with God in mind. So again, you bring a meaningfulness into every moment of your life, whether you're engaging with people or not engaging with people. And so that's a very empowering and exciting thing. But actually, I wanted to talk a little bit about this week's reading, which is really, really special. It's a poem in which Moses teaches the people and gives them, really the fundamental lesson, right, about how they should be cared. He warns them in a poem form, which is quite interesting that he does that. And it's explained just kind of basic and simple, in a simple understanding, that he does that in order that they could easily memorize it. They'll memorize it, and so they'll always have it on their minds. They can have it in their memories. So that's one thing. But the first verse, so in Hebrew it's called Hazinu, which means to listen or give your ear. As Moses says, let the heavens give me an ear and let the earth hear. And, Rashi doesn't bring it, but the commentaries discuss how Moses speaks about the heavens as something close that have to come up with their ear to listen, but the earth, he says, they should hear, which implies like from a distance, and that was because Moses was closer to heaven than he was to earth. So in referencing heaven, they didn't have to, so to speak, didn't have to come as far to hear him, and while on earth it was they had to reach out and strain to hear, so to speak. But this is a call that Moses wants the heavens and earth to bear witness to what he's going to say. And so it explains an interesting thing about bearing witness. And also it's an interesting thing about the idea of warning and the important role in Torah values giving a warning has. It's not the first time Moses has warned the people about the consequences of their actions. He's doing it again, but evidently it's such a fundamental thing to warn. And in fact, we see that halachically, that every time there's a prohibition, there's generally 2 verses that we need. One is a warning and the other a punishment. And you sometimes see that where the Torah will say, you shall not do such and such. And later on it says, those who do such and such shall be put to death, or so on and so, or shall be punished. So that means that there has to be a separate warning and then a separate verse telling what the punishment is. Person needs to be warned separately, and in other words, with its own specific intentionally, the intent is to warn, not just to say a fact, not to discuss it, not to tell you the punishment. but the intention is a warning. And that's what Moses is doing. He's giving a warning. And we also know that in Jewish law, although this isn't the same in between Bnei Noah, Noahides don't have to get the same warning. And we once explained that to a certain extent, is because most of the Noahide laws should be intuitive. They're simple, and there are only 7 of them. So that's at least part of the reason why that's the case. And we also explained how nowadays, there may be an argument to be made that because of the complete ignorance of people, that if they're unaware, that they do need to be educated, and then the punishments might be different. But basically, the idea is most of the Noahide laws, at least in their most basic form, is basic human decency, and that it's so intrinsic to being human that people really shouldn't need a warning for that. But in any event, that being said, obviously we have to teach, we have to let people know. And again, in more modern works, it discusses the idea how in this generation, because there's so much confusion, that it would be hard to say about many things that that even in Noah, Bnei Noah, would not need some kind of warning, at least an education. Okay, because the technical warning that the Torah talks about in terms of punishing an Israelite is at the time of the act. They need to be warned. They need to be warned at the time of the act before doing it. Okay. But the point is it's just interesting that's another interesting thing we find here, is that it says that Moses uses the heavens and the earth as witnesses for 2 reasons, according to Rashi. One of the reasons is because they remain, so to speak, eternal. As long as the earth exists, or the physical universe exists as it is, they're here. They're always here. And so they're witnesses. They can bear witness long after Moses passes away. And that's why he makes them the witnesses. Another explanation is that these are witnesses that can carry out the punishment, just like we see very often in the Torah. It says, as the witnesses throw the first stone, or the witnesses, they're supposed to put the sinner, the wicked person to death, or the transgressor to death. So too, these witnesses here, they're the ones who are going to be the first to mete out punishment against Israel and the Jewish people. In other words, the heavens are not going to give rain, the earth is not going to give forth its produce, and only then afterwards will the nations, the enemies of Israel, come and exterminate them to whatever extent, God forbid, and exile them from their land. Those more severe punishments come only after the heavens and the earth begin the sequence they kind of begin the triggering of the punishment after a prolonged period of going off in the wrong direction, if the people so do so. But this is just also interesting. It's just an interesting, if you think about it, this kind of a paradigm of what a witness is. So a witness, in the first explanation, the witness is someone who was present forever. Well, that means that the witness is used as the one to give proof. Because if there's no witness, then you can't prove the warning took place, right? So that's why it's important that heaven and earth be the witnesses, because they'll always be around, so they can always bear witness. They can always retell that, hey, we know that Moses warned you. Don't pretend like this never happened. We heard it. The second approach touches on something that we studied about and people had a lot of fun discussing a long time ago when I was doing Noahide laws, when we were talking. I think it was one of the last issues that but it was one of the last issues we covered when we were studying the book, Universal Laws, in which he talks about the obligation to establish courts, and whether that means even an individual has to punish if they see someone who's a transgressor, who's a wrongdoer, a violator, and are they obligated to stand up and stop them and mete out punishment on the spot? Or in other words, if there's no government, there's no court, is an individual Noahide obligated to do something about it? So it's kind of interesting. The idea of the witness seems to imply that there's a moral imperative to do something, right? Because what is this witness? The idea of the witness is this witness sees the transgression. I mean, not necessarily here in the case of heaven and earth, because they're hearing the warning. They're not seeing the transgression, but later on they will. Later on, these witnesses will bear witness to what the children of Israel do later on, or the Jewish people do later on. God forbid if they do something wrong. So they hear the warning, and then they see the transgression, and then they mete out the punishment. So that implies that those who are witnesses should become judges and take care of the problem. So that does imply that there's a connection between a witness and a punisher, which in a certain sense makes sense, because who is the right person to punish? Those who don't know that it happened? Those who were in shock to see this happening? Or the people who saw it and they should be outraged by what they saw? And besides the fact, they're just in a fairer position because they know it's true. They saw it, and so they can carry out the punishment. So anyway, so those are the two functions of witnesses. One is to be evidence and proof of the event. The second one seems to be to actually to rise up and mete out the punishment. Now again, and it just fits in very well in Noahide law. In Jewish law, witnesses can't mete out any punishment until the courts render a decision. They can't just do that by themselves generally. But in the event that the court, finds a person guilty, then the witnesses carry out the punishment. It also puts a responsibility on the witnesses. Like, you come to prosecute and condemn someone, then don't wash your hands of it and expect someone else to do your dirty work. You do it. It's just a lot more serious if the witness himself has to carry out the punishment, right? Psychologically. If someone comes and says nonsense, God forbid it's a false witness, and they give false testimony, and because of that, others put that accused to death, it's a horrible, vicious thing, but they're not doing it with their own hands. This forces them to take responsibility for what they have to say. That you said it was decided because of you, you do it. It's a lot heavier. The responsibility is that much heavier on them, and I think that's a good thing. It's kind of like, you're coming to testify so-and-so committed a homicide. You turn on the electric chair switch. Then if you're not comfortable doing that, you're not sure, then don't be a witness. Well, that's basically the message. Okay, so got some interesting lessons from there that I wanted to share. So that's on the first verse, which I'll just read the first verse as here it's translated into English. It says, "Listen carefully, heavens, and I shall speak, and let the earth hear the utterances of my mouth." So this is Moses is speaking. And again, there's an emphasis on speech once again in Judaism, the importance of speech and the power of speech, and how speech, Hasidic thinking, I just found it to be so true and to be so valuable. How much speech can really uplift a person. Like, when a person says holy things, then it uplifts them. It helps them get inspired, and it can be transformative. So anyway, that's at least true as far as I know with myself. But this is what's brought in the holy works. So I don't know if you've experienced that or not, but certainly whether it's a mystical thing that affects the soul, or whether it's simply out of habituation, more natural, scientific type of effect, but what we say has an effect on us. Okay, now in verse 2 it says, "Let my teaching drip like rain, my speech flow like dew, like storm winds blowing on vegetation, and like raindrops on plants." So I thought this was very interesting, because we start this verse in a very soft way, and the teaching should just drip like rain. Drip. And then it says, "And speech like dew," also very soft, very sweet. Dew drip, dew just, it just congeals so to speak. It condensates in a very soft way. You wake up in the morning, it's there, it's nice and cool. So it's quite pleasant. And certainly that's the beginning of the verse. It's saying, let my teachings be pleasant and sweet to you. But then it says, like storm winds blowing on vegetation and like raindrops on plants. So what is this? So Rashi explains this. As I said, the beginning of the verse is saying, so listen to this. This is great stuff. So he says, the same way like rain and dew give life to the world, so too Torah gives life to the world. So that's why Torah is, the metaphor of Torah is rain and dew. So what about storm winds? How is that like Torah? So on that he says, yeah. So he says, but storm winds, on the other hand, that makes it somehow strengthens and hardens the plant, the vegetation. And I guess so too the raindrop, these like a storm raindrops. The language, the difference is that the language here for rain in the end of the verse, it's like shooting an arrow. So in other words, it's forceful rain. Well, the beginning as the rain slowly dripping, or rain dripping down maybe from trees onto the plant. So it's very soft. Dew, very soft, very pleasant. But then we say it should also be like storm winds. So which one is it? And this is what Rashi says, is that words of Torah, they strengthen person and make them strong, make them great. That's what he says. So it's interesting because you see also this similar idea. What I was thinking actually was that we see that Torah has this trick to it that it gives the person strength and determination. What's the word I'm looking for? And strengthens their constitution in the same way that difficulties, tough times often do for people. What do they say? When the going gets tough, the tough get going. So, and again, it has to do with something we spoke about before, that often being pampered actually weakens people. I mean, we all really should know this, because like exercise, when you work the muscle, it gets stronger. When you don't, it gets weaker. So similarly with life experience, it's so interesting. And I know some of you, I don't know, I think you're Nancy, you're retiring, right? Or something. So, but I'm sure you'll do other things. But I was going to mention that the Rabbi would advise people not to retire, to keep on working, because whatever type of role they're playing in society, they should keep doing it. Sometimes he'd tell people the reason was because, like, if you're a person who's in business and also studying Torah, that's a very important example that person's doing both. And so you should keep doing that. Anyhow, the idea really, but the idea is just not, the idea is more just simply keep doing something, keep striving for working, keep working at something. Doesn't have to be your job. Person, but can keep on, continue to get up early in the morning and have things to do, and not just kind of, get up, read the newspaper, and nothing really to do now, sit on the porch, nothing going on. I think his advice was like, keep striving for something, have a goal, a meaningful goal to do. And it does make sense. I think also even scientifically, they say that people who have that kind of thing live longer. I don't know. I think I heard something like that. That it just does make sense, just the person's passion, because when you have a reason, the person has a reason, and they're determined. They need to. They have grandchildren they want to teach, that they want to speak to, that people in the world still need their advice, and then they have a reason to live, and subconsciously that works into all the cells of the person's body, that I need to live. They need to keep going. And so that's a good thing. So I guess my point is that I was thinking that this verse is telling us that the Torah has this incredible, it's like how do I say? It's an antidote. No, it's like this incredible vitamin where it both gives life and is sweetening and calming, but it also makes your heart as a rock. Like it does both. When you're studying Torah, maybe keeping Torah, it doesn't say, it just says Torah. So I don't know if we're talking about studying or observing, maybe both. But there's a reference to words of Torah, strengthening. So in other words, Torah study. Torah study, you need a lot of discipline and you have to rack your brain a lot of time. You know, I don't even rack my brain as much as I used to when I was young. I mean, studying a page of Talmud, oh, that's hard stuff. That is not easy, I'll tell you. It's constantly back and forth. There's little nuances and the question, what's difficult. Whew, that stuff is not easy. It's got to be, I think, probably the hardest thing I've ever come across. The law is not, no, the law is not as difficult as that. Anyway, so my point is simply that, that the Torah is this incredible, vitamin that it has both qualities in it. On the one hand, it calms and has a certain sweetness. On the other hand, it makes you tough and strong, so to speak, at least internally. It strengthens you, it gives a person a stronger will, stronger ability to persevere things. That's how I'm reading it, because it's like there's also storm winds. What's a storm wind? Storm wind is there's a tough side of it. And Rashi even says it makes a person strong, makes them great. Same idea. It's interesting. The idea of a storm making someone great is the idea that through struggle, a person emerges great, right? That's how a person emerges. A great person doesn't come out of convenience. A great person comes out of difficult times, like Teddy Roosevelt. I was looking into the biography of Teddy Roosevelt. Fascinating person. Different generation, a different time. But I think you can definitely, there's some examples in that character. Certainly someone who was very, very believed in perseverance and struggling. And he he persevered a lot of pain and things like that. Fighter. Nancy, I understand from this documentary that Teddy Roosevelt was a cowboy for a while. He was rustling cattle, and he displaced or broke an arm or a bone or something. He kept on doing it. He kept on working the herd, gathering in the herd until the end of the workday. That's, we don't hear of that. You don't hear of things like that too often anymore. But so that's what the Torah should make a person. And if it's not doing that, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we missing? And obviously part of it is that Torah really requires, now does Noahide Torah require that? No, you don't have to push yourself as a Noahide. But nevertheless, maybe it's good to know, like the crown of Torah is given to who? People who stay up late, who push themselves, who sacrifice, as it says in Ethics of the Fathers. You learn Ethics of the Fathers, right? What does it say about that? The path of Torah is bread with salt, right? And water with, I think, bitter waters or something, and sleeping on the floor. And a person toils in Torah. So, there's a lot of discussion on what's the meaning of it, but one of it could be the person's willing to live that way, doesn't care. If he needs to, he will. If necessary, the person lives in poverty. If they have to, they're not interested. That could be one approach. Doesn't mean you have to live like that, but it means a person should be so determined, even if because of their study they are become impoverished, then they should be satisfied with that. We're not on this level in this generation. I don't know anyone who's able to do that. But I mean that's also part of the point. Like it's incredible. Like other generations did do things like that, and that's because they lived harder from a young age. So there's positives and minuses of the way that we live. You know, people in the Jewish Orthodox community was like, wow, those bygone eras where we had such giants that they studied Torah all night and I don't know, went to the immersing pool in the snow and the ice, and people were different though. People were used to hardship. People are not accustomed to any hardship, so that's why we can't do it. There was a story that I heard. There's some fascinating stories about the history of the land of Israel. One was discussing the Yemenite. I was listening to is the early Yemenite immigration to Israel. And when they heard about it, so later it's very famous that the Yemenite Jews were brought with airplanes, that the Israeli government, the early Israeli government, sent planes. I think it was called Operation Moses or something, maybe. And they were brought from Yemen by airplane, like large airplanes, to Israel. But I think there was an earlier emigration, which was when the settlements started to develop in again, the late 1800s, the 1880s, and the 1900s. And I believe this was the story. And the Yemenite community was told about this, and they decided that's it. If this is happening, if there's new settlements, this is a sign that the Messiah is about to arrive. And they traveled on foot, from Yemen to Israel. People died on the way. And there's a story of that. The way I heard the story is that the sage, the leader of the community, he was an elderly man already, and he traveled on foot all these miles and so on and so on. And I guess the provisions were limited, and he was so weak and exhausted by the time he got to Jerusalem or something, and they were trying to convince him to stop. And he said, "No, I'm already here. I have to go get to the Temple Mount." And there he expired. I think he reached the wall or something. He got within the area of the holy, of the holies, the Temple Mount, and then he expired. So anyway, why am I telling you this story? I don't know. Just on my mind about the idea of the differences in the generations, and what people were once willing to do. I guess that's why it's on my mind. It's the idea of what's that have to do with this idea of the storm winds on the vegetation. The storm winds are the struggles, the difficulties that strengthen us in life, and could strengthen us in terms of our dedication to serve God and really help us go higher levels in Torah and wisdom and character and all these things. As King Solomon talks about in Proverbs so many times, a lazy person it's destructive to be lazy. It's a person who is eager and swift and hardworking that succeeds and ends up being a person that's God-fearing and so on. And the laziness leads to the other direction. Okay. Now the next verse says, "When I proclaim the name of the Eternal, ascribe greatness to our God." So I was thinking, what is that? Well, I think it actually says in the Sages, but it came to my mind immediately that the fact that these two verses are laid down, one right next to the other, one is placed next to the other, is to tell you that a person should make blessing when they study Torah. A person has to make sure to make the blessing on Torah study. Now, is a Noahide obligated to do that? No, of course not. He's not obligated to do so. However, we do know that this was a reason for the destruction of the temple. One of the reasons the sages give is that they didn't make a blessing on the Torah before studying. So I could certainly say that it's a logical point, is just to thank God for giving us Torah, and therefore every person should engage in thanking God for giving him Torah and should make some kind of a blessing and some type of a request from God that the study go well, and thank God for giving them the study. So a Noahide isn't obligated to make the formal blessing that the members of the Great Assembly instituted, but you should say something. You should may have some kind of a prayer and some type of thank you for the Torah study before studying. And obviously, you have the option of saying the prayer, saying the blessing. It's many. I think there are many opinions that it's fully permitted. So that's what I see here. The connection that we say this verse, when I proclaim the name of the Eternal, ascribe greatness to our God. Right after the second verse, that's talking about Torah study. So you see that Torah study should go together with blessing God. Okay. Next verse says, though that he is the rock, his actions are perfect, for all his ways are just. A faithful God without injustice. He is proclaimed righteous, and this is the correct thing to call him righteous. So, I mean, this is a statement of both based on what we see and also a degree of faith. That it is so. Sometimes we don't see these things so clearly. That we don't see God's justice so clearly. But he's a faithful God, and eventually we will see and perceive exactly, what, all the justice, and we'll understand all of God's ways in the world. However, what this is saying that we can learn from is the last part, which is that the correct thing is for a person to declare God being righteous and a righteous judge and a faithful God. And when a person does that, that's doing the right thing, even if it's maybe based on faith. And not to do that, despite the fact that there's faith needed, is wrong. In other words, basically what we're saying is that's one of the requirements of faith, is to believe in God's justice, even though sometimes we don't understand it and don't see it. It's very, very important. In other words, when something doesn't go someone's way, or we see things in life that we don't understand why they happen, they seem unjust, we should not turn to resentment towards God, but we have to have the humility to say, I'm just a small creature here. I don't understand. There's a lot here that I don't know. There's the universe. And even human history has been so long. I don't know I can't see the connections and why this is happening. It's not for me to know, not for me to decide. In other words, it requires humility, which a lot of people have difficulty with. And again, it also has to do with this generation, because human beings feel they're the center and that they know everything. But we don't know, we really don't know very much. We're mostly blind. We just see our own lives and the things around us. I mean, for heaven's sake, we don't even remember what happened last generation. Most people don't know a thing. They have no idea. They don't know what their parents went through, let alone what happened a generation or two ago. They remember nothing, which is a big problem in its own right, which we'll get to soon. Maybe we'll get to today, but the verse says, ask your elders about history. Ask them about what happened. That's in the next, later on. That's in verse 7. So, but anyway, we need to have humility, and we have to know that God runs the world, and that there are many, many things that we don't understand. And that one day we'll understand it. But everything is bringing us close to the refinement and the perfection of the world, even though we often don't know how. Okay. So the next verse is very important in terms of something a person has to understand. The next verse says, this verse 5, corruption is theirs, not his. It is his children's fault, a perverted and warped generation. So, but actually it's interesting the way they translated corruption is theirs, not his. No one was saying that God was corrupt, God forbid. So what does it mean? So actually, the corruption here, it means more like harm, the harm. The harm is not his, but theirs, meaning to say person sins, a lot of times the person thinks like they're going to lash out at God. They're not happy with their life. You know what? I'm not keeping this anymore. You know, as if they're doing God a favor or something. And this verse is trying to tell us. This verse is trying to say, listen, you're not doing God a favor. And it's not your inconvenience you're doing it for God. No, this is for you. These things are for your benefit. Ultimately, maybe short term you don't understand it. But in a very, very around the corner, very quickly you understand. You'll start to understand how these things are for your benefit. And if you don't keep the Torah and its commandments, everyone according to their commandments, Noahide with the 7, that they're responsible and all their offshoots of those 7. Those things are the natural requirements and health. It's like, again, like it's back to the vitamins or the nutrition pyramid. I mean, these things are what a human being needs to be healthy. If you don't have them, then you're not going to be healthy. You're not, it's not like, oh, this is for God. He's like, forcing us. I think that's also, again, something that comes a bit from, should I say it? But it's a kind of a Christian idea. The God, the Jewish God, he's vengeful. He forces you to do things and makes life difficult. No. He's like a father, a stern father that's trying to get you to do the right thing for your own benefit. For your benefit. He doesn't need you. That's what the verse is saying. You're not hurting him. You can't hurt God. He's perfect and exalted above all created things. You can't do anything to him. Why do you think he's giving us these commandments? Because he doesn't like it if you misbehave. He's doing it for your benefit. Your benefit. So that's an important point for people to understand and realize. And unfortunately, I think that concept that the law is repressive has caused tremendous damage in the world, because people feel that's how they feel. Oh, the Judeo religion is repressing people, is forcing them to. Now we need to let ourselves go. We need to enjoy, and so on and so forth. And this is a big problem. This causes a lot of trouble. So that's why this verse is so important. So the way to read it would be, they have harmed themselves, not him. That's how to really translate it properly. They've caused destruction to him. No, not to him, to themselves. This is their own blemish and their perverted, warped generation. You could say that's why they're warped. They're warped thinking, oh, this is something we have to do for God. Not understanding that this is for their benefit. Of course, yes, you'll be closer to God, but that's the point. The true goodness, that God is the source of all life and vitality and blessing, and being close to him will bring blessing throughout every part of your life. Right, kitty? Even the cat gets it. Cat? So, okay. So there's another point here. Let's see. So if we skip ahead, because we are running out of time, I think I want to skip ahead a little bit to the next section of reading, the second portion of the week of the Sabbath reading, which says, "Remember days of yore, contemplate the years of one generation to another. Ask your prophet, and he will inform you. Your elders, and they will tell you." So, yeah, look at the past to understand. And then he says the following. And it says, and again, it seems like there's more than one translation, but I'm going to read it. When the Supreme One gave inheritance to the nations. That's one reading. When he dispersed mankind, he set boundaries of the nations for the number, according to the number, or for the sake of the number of the children of Israel. So this verse is very fascinating for the nations, because it's talking about the relationship and parallels between Israel and the nations, and it makes you scratch your head and think. And as Rashi brings what some of these things are, but clearly it's so it's saying, the simple reading is, when God gave the nations their inheritance and dispersed all peoples and set their borders, he did it according to the number of the children of Israel. There's some relationship between all the different nations and the number of the children of Israel. So, we know that there were 70 individual Israelites who went down to Egypt, and we know traditionally there's 70 initial nations. Now there's a lot more, but different countries, but in essence there are 70 nations. That's the Torah tradition. So what does that say? It's very fascinating that the same number of Jews who went down to Egypt is the same number of all the nations, which almost represents, if you think about it, the idea that Israel was doing something there on behalf of everybody. It's like there was one individual for each nation, right? There's this correlation. One Jew, one nation. 70 Jews, 70 nations. Going down to Egypt. What was in Egypt? Suffering, a trial that they had to go through in order to emerge, to be the emissaries of God to all nations. Afterwards, they had to go through that suffering. It says that Abraham picked it. Abraham picked it. They should go through that suffering as a means instead of Gehenna, as a means of punishment for wrongdoing and sin. Now, there's another point here. Another reading. The other reading is that when the supreme God meted out just punishment to the nations, he dispersed them. He set their boundaries for the sake of the children of Israel, which means that during the flood, God, when the society was wicked in the time of the flood, God destroyed them. God brought a flood and washed them away. But when it came to the Tower of Babel, then he dispersed them. He didn't destroy them, even though they rebelled against him badly. Why? So it says here, that's because Shem had to come out of them, Noah's son, and from him came the children of Israel, and therefore, instead of destroying them, they were dispersed. So again, you see an interesting point, is that for the merit of the Jewish people, all the nations are spared in their merit. You can say a similar idea that, as it says, that there are converts that's supposed to come from all different nations, right? And Bnei Noah is a form of a sort of a convert, a ger toshav, right? Person, ger. So from all the nations, there are such people, and as it says elsewhere, when the question arises during the war with Midian, when Moses attacks the Midianites and God tells them to wage war against them, so the question arises, what happened with Moab? I don't understand. Moab was also part of the same scheme, right? So why, in fact, it was the king of Moab he was really the initiator of the whole thing. So Rashi says there on that adlak, at that location, that but Ruth was going to come from Moab. So God didn't order a war of destruction against them because Ruth was going to come from them. So again, we see this idea that because of future converts and holiness that comes out from a nation, it can sustain the entire nation for generations. So that's also, so that again is the connection between, first of all, the point is that there's a potential for acknowledgement of God's kingdom and for there to be Israelites, servants of God, to come out from all the nations. And due to that potential, that's one of the reasons. That, at least I could say, due to that potential, even when they're deserving of destruction, or when they've come to a really low level, God continues to sustain them. So that's again a lesson that Moses is telling us here also, that when God punished the nations in the beginning, during the time of the Tower of Babel, he dispersed them. He didn't exterminate them because he didn't wipe them out, even though their sin was very, very grave, because of the sake of the future of Shem and Abraham and so on, and the children of Israel. Okay, so what's the lesson for the nations? I mean, I think the mitzvah of loving the Jewish people, it's for the Jewish people, and it's also for all nations. Again, I think we've spoken about this before. spiritually, the idea of connecting, bonds you and brings you, just like a Jew is supposed to be connected to the tzaddik, to the saints, to the generation. It's really the same thing. That the nation should also be connected to Israel, and obviously to the most outstanding members also, particularly of Israel. But Israel as a society, keeps Torah. Some do acts of kindness, charity, and some are doing more things, the Sabbath and all the other mitzvahs. There's all different types of Jews. But nevertheless, as a body politics, so to speak, as a body, as a society, they're carrying out all the mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, and they're God's emissaries in the world, and it's good to obviously look to them as teachers and also feel connected to them and their destiny. Okay. Questions, comments, thoughts?